This panel on running a better business was presented at the NY-GEO 2018 conference on April 18th, 2018, and was moderated by Fink of ZBF Geothermal.
So hello everyone and welcome to the Running a Better Business panel. On this panel we have 4 different aspects of what you need to potentially run a geothermal business. We have a marketing professional, we have a safety professional, we have an attorney, and then we have an insurance agent / attorney. At this point, I'll let them all go through and introduce themselves. I'm Fink, ZBF Geothermal, a contractor and a fan of most of the people up here. Actually, all the people up here. So, I still know some of them that well. But so we'll start with Sam, and we'll let them, tell a little bit about themselves, about what they do, and if each one of you can include a tip for the people in this room that they can take away to help them run a better business, we would appreciate it.
Oh, we can do that right now.
Yeah, as part of the introduction.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, so first note in marketing is know where the microphone on button is and know how to use it. How is everyone? My name is Custodio. I am with a firm called Thinkhouse. We are based out on Long Island, and we are in advertising, marketing, strategic consulting, digital, traditional print, general idea factory. And our job is to help companies of all different types, energy sector and beyond, sort of find their voice, create a brand that has a sense of differentiation to it, find a space in the market, and a message that is not being leveraged, and create a message, create a, hopefully, dialogue between our customers and their prospects, so that we can do the old-fashioned things like generate leads for them, generate interest, brand awareness, and all those things that, unfortunately, a lot of business people greet sometimes with a sense of dubiousness. And but if you look at your day-to-day life apart from the business, you realize, if you take a second, just how fervently you're being marketed to and how effectively you're being marketed to, particularly nowadays where it really is a 24/7, 365 onslaught and siege for your attention. And there's good aspects to that and there's bad aspects, just like everything else. But just as you see yourself thinking about a particular product or service that in a certain moment, due to a circumstance that arises in your life, you need, chances are really good that someone like me and my colleague Joyce back there has found a way to strategically plant that product or service in your mind. I apologize ahead of time for that level of mental manipulation. We do so with only the best interest at heart, because today it's actually harder than ever to cut through what we used to call clutter, because there's so much clutter out there now, and there's so many means to create clutter. So just very quickly, I'll leave you with really one thought. I want to trying to narrow this down to one thought, and we just have a couple of minutes each way. So just think about with your marketing, at whatever level your marketing is. That may be, on the large side of small to medium business. It might be on the micro side of a small micro shop. Think of absolute adaptability. So that's what all of your marketing should be, absolutely adaptable. And what I mean by that, when you think about absolute, think about your brand. Think about the name of the company. Think about the logo. Think about what you stand for. What are your core values? What is your unique value proposition that you offer customers? That is kind of wrapped up in business model and all those other things, but it's what you believe your business stands for. This is your business ID. That is absolute. You see a lot of times, and we see this with companies that we work with, from the very largest to the very smallest. They seem often restless about their logos, about their names, and they basically, on a business level, fidget and tinker, and not realizing the damage they're doing to the absolute nature of their brand. Where you adapt is on the marketing side. So outside of branding, that is outreach. That's how you get out there and try and connect with your prospects. There, if you're not adaptable, then you are making a big mistake, because there are so many different ways, so many different types of messages that will connect with an audience that continues to be split and redefined and resegmented in any number of ways. And again, large or small companies, we see folks doing the same thing on the marketing side, and that is, this is my ad. It took me forever to create this, and I'm not going to change it. And magazine after magazine, digital destination after digital destination, this is the message. So there, you don't want to be absolute. And ironically, we find that there is a tendency to stick with what you have, because marketing is hard, writing is hard, coming up with ideas is hard. But just think about being as adaptable as possible to a market that is constantly evolving. The brand that is absolutely recognizable, that has an absolute message to it. If you can put those two things together, even on a very limited scale budget, you will be connecting with an audience, and you just need to trust that process. And the investment will come in returns long term if you're consistent with it. One ad in one newspaper, one magazine, that's not going to do it for you, right? Save your money. Make a concerted effort to be out there in the market and stick with that kind of absolute adaptability strategy, and we believe you'll see results. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, Robert Garvey, Federal OSHA. I am the Area Director for the OSHA Albany office. Our office has jurisdiction over 19 counties on the eastern section of New York State, everything from the Canadian border down to Orange County, down bordering Rockland County. Federal OSHA has jurisdiction over private sector workplaces and other federal agencies, regulatory, and again, my interest is that workers are safe and workers go home at night. I have to deal tragically with fatalities, and so I have an interest, just as you have an interest, to have a safe workplace and to be more profitable and productive. I want workplaces to be safe. And so, you know, we do workplace inspections from a regulatory standpoint and just do compliance inspections. So I'm here to take any questions you may have specifically about OSHA standards. But again, do your best out there to evaluate, identify, recognize, and evaluate hazards, and put controls in to eliminate those hazards. Again, it's unnecessary for workers to be exposed to hazards.
So we're going to take questions at the very end. And at the very end, we'll also ask just to elaborate a little bit more on, I think trench safety is probably the biggest one that our members are dealing with on a daily basis. The geothermal pipes are buried in the ground, and we just want to make sure that when you put a man in the trench, that everyone's safe.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Jen Harvey. I'm a construction lawyer with a firm in Albany called Couch White. I do construction litigation. I do construction contracts. I do a fair amount of public contracting support, whether that's MWBE certification, whether that is obtaining waivers for contractors that need to fulfill MWBE certification, or bid protests, or compliance with vendor responsibility issues. We're not talking today, I don't think, largely about public work here. It seems to be primarily a private work setting that most of the members are in. And most of you are in, you know, one of three different types of relationships. Either you're a subcontractor to a general contractor, in which case you're being handed a contract. The first rule is always read the contract. Always the first rule. People tend to get very excited about getting the work. It's so hard to get the work, and I totally understand that. But you have to understand if this is work that is going to be profitable for you to do in the long run. When you get the contract, read the contract, understand the contract. If there's something in it that you don't understand, get some help with it. Lots of times I'll see folks that are subcontractors, especially specialty subcontractors on larger projects, and what you'll see at the very beginning of the contract will be the flow down clause that says you shall be bound in the same way that the general contractor is by all the prime contract documents. You've never seen any of those documents. You need to see those documents. You most particularly need to see the general conditions, because you need to know if there's some sort of indemnity you are giving by doing this, and what is precisely being flowed down to you in terms of your obligations on the job. So understanding, you know, the boundaries of what you're doing is incredibly important, and using your contracts as a tool to get you there and to limit your exposure in unexpected ways is really, really important. The second category that I think that you folks are primarily in is being a GC, or a direct contract with an owner in your own right. And in that case, you know, you're coming up with your own subcontract. To the extent that you're just using an invoice with some attached terms and conditions, you're doing yourself a potential disservice. Coming up with a standard contract to use that hits on, it doesn't have to be incredibly complicated, but hits on the primary boundaries of what you're doing is really important. It only becomes important if, number one, you're not getting paid, and then it's really important. Or you need to extract yourself from the job, or perhaps you perform half the job and the owner tells you you're done. What are your rights done under the terms and conditions of your invoice document? So, you know, the most important thing that I think from this type of a contract is, before you're doing the work, it's always assess the scope. What is it you're doing? What is it, more importantly, that you're not doing? Make sure that your scope is precise and that it addresses all that you're doing, but only what you intend to do. Second is schedule. When is the work going to be done? Third is payment. What's the payment structure? Is it lump sum? Is it time and materials? Are you being paid on a milestone basis? If you're being paid on a schedule of performance, who's assessing where you're at in terms of that schedule? Are you in control of that? Are you not? And understand that when it's important to have a contractual provision providing when the work is complete and you are entitled to final payment. Final payment is really important in construction, because when the owner makes final payment, all of the defects that are not latent are typically accepted, okay, and then waived. So that point is a very critical point to be able to get to in a concrete way. Termination. When can you end the performance prior to its conclusion? Who has rights to the work if, I don't know, a tornado comes through and damages all the work? Whose loss is that? What about permits? Who's responsible for them? Who's paying for the fees for those permits? What about, for you folks, what about subsurface conditions that are unexpected and may not be fully accessible in advance? What about changes in the work? What if the owner adds or extends the work? How is your agreement going to accomplish that, and how is it going to encompass it in a way that you're going to be paid for owner-directed work? Dispute resolution, another really important thing. I have a lot of folks that would prefer to go to a mediation arbitration rather than engaging in litigation before a court. That can be a very helpful thing. It can get you to an end result much more quickly. That's something that you're only going to get to if you have a contract in place. And finally, what's your warranty? What are you offering? What are you not offering? You want all of that spelled out very particularly. And then sort of the third category here is dealing with your own subcontractors. Now, I know that a lot of folks, especially when their businesses are smaller, tend to deal with subs on a handshake. It's a very dangerous thing to do in New York State right now. It's always been sort of it's a dangerous thing contractually to do, but New York State has something called the Construction Fair Play Act. And what the Construction Fair Play Act is all about is assessing who is a subcontractor and who is an actual employee that should be paid as an employee. And one of the factors that's assessed in making that determination is whether there is a written contract. So again, having a written subcontract protects you. I'm not going to talk about limiting risk with your subcontract by establishing insurance requirements, because I think one of my co-panelists is going to address that. But again, you have to understand what is the scope of what you are contracting with that subcontractor for, and what is their performance creating risk for you. All of those two items need to be concretely addressed. If you're dealing with a straight-up supplier, add your own terms and conditions to your invoice. Dial it in. Folks will often push back on that, but dial it in anyway. Otherwise, you're just dealing with these rules of the UCC, which are not always forgiving or wonderful rules for those who have accepted a delivery, and maybe perhaps the delivery has defective items in it. So you want to have all of that added into terms and conditions. And finally, what if you're not getting paid? That's the primary reason that somebody comes to see somebody like me. Understand the tools that are out there for you. One of them being mechanics liens. Mechanics liens are a statutory creature. They've been created essentially to provide that workmen and suppliers that provide materials and goods to the improvement of real property can exert a lien over that property. Now, mechanics lien doesn't guarantee that you're going to be paid. It's just leverage to be paid. But many properties have mortgages on them. And typically the filing of a lien is the defect to the mortgage. So the owner will clean it up if the bank becomes aware of that. Also, you may be working on a large project with a payment bond. Payment bonds are there to protect the subcontractors and suppliers and to ensure that they get paid, but you have to comply with the bond requirements in terms of filing a notice and payment. Again, if you're on a contract, it's a larger contract, and you have your subcontractor, there's a flow down, and there's an actual payment bond on the job, request a copy of the bond. You need to know what the time periods are for asserting a claim on the bond. You don't want to miss that window because you forfeit your rights that way. So finally, I just want to leave you with the thought that if you have an enforceable contract, your remedies are clear. If you don't have an enforceable contract, what you're stuck with is establishing that you are entitled to payment to prevent a windfall to the owner. And the measure of your payment is going to be the value of the work that you contributed to the property. As you can imagine, that creates a problem of proof almost always, and you're not going to get full and entire value in terms of what you are owed at that point. Because all you're going to get is the equitable assessment of that value of the work. So my advice, take the time at the beginning of the job, understand the scope, understand the other important factors that you are obligating yourself to, and protect yourself to the extent that you can in terms of those other folks that you are contracting with in the process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jen. So we just heard about some of the risks associated with contracts, but some of those risks can also be mitigated by insurance. So we have Frank to explain some of the insurance requirements and guidelines that contractors should have. I will let you know that I recently found out there's about 85 different insurance policies I've never heard of, and insurance brokers would like to sell you 90 of them. So with that, Frank.
Thanks for that, Zach. Frank Piccininni, Senior Attorney and Account Executive at Sterling Rose. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about a product that everybody is forced to buy, but nobody wants to buy. But it's necessary. And interestingly, it can be used, if it's used well, as a marketing tool. And if some of you want to get these bigger geothermal contracts from some of these large owner-developer types, they're going to enforce very stringent insurance requirements. But with the big stringent insurance requirements comes the big contracts. So certainly we want to help you not only mitigate the risk and save the price, but there has to also be the value-added service that your insurance broker gives to you. So I want to speak briefly about some of the exposures that you'll face as a geothermal contractor that you may not consider. One of them, particularly if you work in the 5 boroughs, is the New York labor law. I'm sure many of you have heard of this. It's troubling in the sense that if you have an employee on a site and they're injured, if they fall from heights, and height can just be falling off a ladder, or in some circumstances even falling off the curb could be considered a fall from heights. And you think that you potentially would be protected by the workers' compensation bar. So your employer would put a claim into the workers' comp policy. However, what often happens is that the worker will sue the property owner, who is your client, and the client will action over your general liability policy right back into the equation. And at which point you'll have a very expensive claim on your hands that will affect your renewal and affect your bottom line. So this is one of the risks that we look to mitigate via the insurance contract. Other ones, and ones that are not necessarily as obvious, is any pollution liability exposure associated with geothermal contracting. So environmental claims are explicitly excluded from 90% of the general liability policies. But what you'll need generally is a separate contractor's pollution liability policy or a combined general liability, contractor's pollution liability policy to cover that risk. Otherwise, you'll be uncovered if you just purchase a general liability policy. So what environmental risks are you facing on a daily basis? Well, one, you're drilling. So if you hit a tank or exacerbate an existing pollution condition, that may be an uncovered claim. In addition, geothermal is largely an HVAC system, and you're punching holes in the wall. So there's a huge mold exposure when it comes to this work, and mold is typically defined as a pollutant by the courts, and therefore would be barred by the pollution exclusion on the general liability policy. So that's a second exposure that you may not have realized that you face. And the third is professional. So the general liability policy will only cover you for bodily injury and property damage. A professional claim, such as you didn't put the right unit in, will be uncovered by your general liability policy. So those are some exposures I wanted to briefly discuss. I also want to talk about the risk management that a broker should be providing in order to kind of mitigate some of these exposures. So one of which, and this will overlap a lot with what Jen said, is to have very strong subcontracting agreements in place. If you have somebody on the site working for you as a sub, they're essentially your employee. And if there's a claim, if they kind of screw up, it's on you and your policy. So there has to be a strong contract in place between you and your subs. These contracts are something that your brokers should be vetting for you, and particularly helping with indemnification language from an insurance perspective. Also, they should be helping putting in very stringent insurance requirements so you can ensure that your subs will actually have the coverage that you need in the event of this claim. In addition to just having the agreements are great, you also have to vet the subcontractor's insurance policy, and really that should be your broker's role. And then that's not just receiving a certificate with your name listed as an additional insured. You need to actually get a copy of those policies and have your broker take a look to make sure that there's no action over exclusion, or to ensure that these contractors' pollution liability exposures would be covered by your sub. And also, the role of your broker would be to pushing back against onerous requirements put on by your clients. So I've seen some pretty ridiculous insurance requirements, $10, $20 million limits required by owner-developers for a job that's a $20,000, $30,000 job. And rather than just buying more insurance, your insurance broker should at least be talking to your client and trying to help you push back against those onerous requirements. So the one thing that maybe you all want to hear about, I mean, the risk management is important, but how do you save money? That's the last thing I wanted to talk about here. Our shop is very much coverage driven. We want to ensure that the coverage is there, but we're always cognizant of pricing for our clients. So if your shop can qualify, we recommend a combined contractor's pollution liability, professional liability, and general liability policy. Because you share the limit amongst those different exposures, you're able to save on premium for each individual policy. So that's an important consideration. Additionally, your workers' compensation. Zach asked me to touch briefly on some options. The thing about workers' comp is that it's all statutorily driven. It's really just a matter of what are you doing, what is your class code, and how much payroll is associated with each class code. But it's important that your broker really drills down on which class codes and payroll numbers you're putting out there. Because you might have a driller on staff and say, okay, that guy does, we pay him $100,000 a year, and he's our driller. But part of their time, there may be some office work associated with their job. There may be some driving time. You might be driving the drill rigs back and forth to the job site. Those are different class codes. So drilling is obviously a higher risk as viewed by the comp carriers. But if that $100,000 can be broken up based on how much time your employee is out driving to the job site or maybe doing some clerical work, it's a good way to drive the rate down for the insurance. So you asked for a tip. My tip is to get a good broker who has value-added services that they can really help you with, as opposed to just buying insurance for you.
Thanks, Frank. Just by a show of hands, who here that the contractor is part of a workers' comp safety group? That's one of the other things that Frank and I talk about a lot. It's not something Frank directly administers, but there are workers' comp safety groups depending on classifications out there. The one I'm part of personally gives us a 25% upfront discount on New York State insurance funds policies, and I just got a 20% rebate check back on Monday on my premium because the group as a whole performed well and was a safe group. And through that safety groups, they'll provide free OSHA training, free site safety consultants, among other things. So I encourage everyone that's a contractor in the room, in addition to checking your rate codes, to see if you might be eligible for a safety group. That's an immediate savings from day one. With that, are there specific questions or any of the panelists in the audience? Chris is going to walk around with the microphone, so.
Hi. After scaring us to death with everything you just mentioned about insurance and knowing why open the doors, on workman's comp, you get audited. They want to see your 941s, what's the class code, and then they're going to break it down. How are we as owners able to break it down, let's say when you're getting an audit, because that's at the end of the day what we're going to be paying on. How do we justify that? What do we need to do to justify that?
Yeah, so that's really a role for your broker to do, to kind of hold your hand through this. But what I would suggest is to have your payroll broken out well. So if you have an individual, as I said, making $100,000 a year, each of their days should be broken up. It took them about an hour to and from the job site. That's the driving class code. It took them, he was on the job site, or he or she was on the job site for 4 hours doing whatever. It's really about the documentation when you get back to it. And taking very diligent notes while somewhat cumbersome administratively is super important and can help your premium. In addition, there are, and Sterling Risk has this in-house, auditing services for you. So you can actually go back 3 years on your comp policy and look to ensure that the mod is correct, the modifier, that it's just a coefficient that determines how safe what your loss history was. So to ensure that the mod was calculated correctly, to make sure your class codes were calculated correctly, and to ensure that each of your workers are classified correctly. And you can go back 3 years and recover a lot of that premium. So something to think about.
So Frank, what I just learned is when my audit comes up next year, you handle it for me?
Yes.
Thank you, Al. So I have a question for Sam. Sam, I know you love branding and keywords and slogans. If anyone saw in the program bar, there's a Thinkhouse ad. Sam is, I'm totally responsible for that slogan. And when I saw it, I immediately fell in love with that one. So are you a fan of the hottest technology in heating and cooling for geothermal, or the coolest technology in geothermal?
Well, that's a national debate going on right now. No, really, it's about finding language that is going to connect in either way. So it's leveraging a robust vocabulary that, in this particular case, the energy sector certainly provides. It's about having a little bit of fun, right? Marketing is and advertising is not it's not a bad profession. It's something that you can have fun with, and the more fun that your customers and your prospects feel, the more comfortable they feel, the more familiar they feel with you, you would be surprised how that works internally in the decision-making process to go with you. So don't take yourself so seriously. Don't take your service and your products so seriously. Find a way to, lighten up a bit, and always think about any kind of message that is based in value for your target. Don't get intoxicated by your own tech, intoxicated by the bells and whistles. Things that excite you may not be exciting to your customers. So you got to just step away from yourself for a minute, think about how your customers think, what's important to them, and then present your message in a way that, whether it's through humor or whether it's through a clever turn of phrase, is going to connect with them and offer them value. So in that case, perhaps you like the headline because it's a turn of phrase, but it's also speaking about an inherent value that you're going to get.
So hottest or coolest?
Hottest or coolest. I am going to say that
and Sam could have been an attorney in another life. He's going around the bush on the answer. So,
Only because we actually did have a discussion about this.
This was a real conversation.
And it went back a couple of times. I'm going to say cool because that's just...
What you ended on?
No, it's because I think that you want this technology to feel that way for your customers.
Perfect, thank you.
Wouldn't it maybe depend on the season?
That would then involve printing 2 copies of all their shows.
Although seasonal advertising is not a bad idea.
All right. Were there other questions from the audience? If not, I have a few others. Chris, you want to go to Lloyd? Lloyd, name, company,
Okay.
all that kind of information.
Lloyd Hamilton with Verde Geothermal. Robert, I was wondering if you could actually give an explanation as to what an attic is, a confined space, and what it wasn't that could be understood. Because even after reading the literature, I'm still not sure when I get into trouble with a confined space of an attic.
Confined space of an attic.
Yeah.
Generally, a confined space has limited means of entry, egress. It has to, it's not normally designed for human occupancy.
Well, that would describe every attic, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, you get into the legalities of looking to the definition, so,
Right.
so you know, we're bound to enforce, whether it's in general industry confined spaces, you know, silos, grain bins,
Right, yeah.
or in, you know, particularly for trenches where there may be a hazardous atmosphere. So that seems to
Yeah,
me.
those are easier, but like if I pull down stairs, I'm pretty sure it's not, but like if I go through a scuttle hole, it is.
If it meets the definition of a confined space per the standard, we would look at it as a confined space. I don't know the particular configuration you're talking about, but
Right.
an attic typically wouldn't be, in my estimation, it's not something that we've cited as a confined space.
All right, thank you.
And Lloyd might be one of the few contractors that actually read the OSHA book back and forth. So.
No, not back and forth, that's going to be too confusing.
All right.
Just quickly talk about a little bit about excavations. You know, it is an initiative of OSHA currently. We've seen an increase in fatalities related to excavation, cave-in. So if you have a professional engineer who designs protective systems for you, make sure you follow them. Have a competent person inspect your trenches. Typically, you know, we want to make sure the inspections are done daily based on environmental conditions. You get rain, you know, or sloping, the sides of the trenches start to cave in. So the trenches need to be inspected daily by a competent person. Trenches greater than 20 feet deep need to be designed by a professional engineer. Egress in and out of a trench is important. Putting heavy equipment on the sides of trenches and the juxtaposition of potentially other hazards adjacent to trenches creates problems. You know, putting back the excavated material back far enough away from the trench so it doesn't create an additional hazard. It just, look at the standard. I would just, our website has some great information on our website, so if anybody needs to know exactly what the standard requires, I would encourage you to see our website, and there's a bunch of tools there and information that could be helpful for you.
Thank you.
Jerry Wiley Raft. My question relates to that issue. It's mainly trenches. Then I was wondering about the top safety issues with geothermal that you've seen percentage-wise over the years.
You know, if I just based on citation experience, or let me just say across the board for trenching, is having no protective system. You know, people being in a trench greater than 5 foot deep, not protected. And it's, again, unfortunately, if that thing goes, you're going to have either serious injury or death. And then you're going to have, you know, workers and emergency personnel trying to dig the person out, and it's going to be a bad scene. So protective systems, another big citation, again, is egress in and out of the trench. Is the person competent to evaluate the trench hazards? Putting material, again, too close to the edge of the trench where it could fall on top of them.
Not methane necessarily.
Fire. Well, again, for your industry, yes. I mean, there's potential for hazardous atmosphere, so you have to test the atmosphere. So you're going to need to do testing of the atmosphere to make sure it's not you know, it doesn't have a hazardous atmosphere, all those type of issues.
Hi, Cindy McCarron with the New York State Department of Public Service. None of you all have mentioned this, but I just want to remind everybody, before you do any digging, call 811. Make sure you get a mark out of all underground utilities. And I cannot stress that enough. We still have dozens of incidents every year where people damage underground facilities because they do not call before they dig. So thank you for the public service message.
Hi, Leonard Sard from Achievement Renewable Energy. I would like you to expand your comments, Frank, on professional liability insurance. I think there are a number of exposures for geothermal contractors relative to professional E&O. We do design of loop systems, we select equipment, and you know, my understanding is that the CGL policy is just not going to cover that.
Yes, that's true. And you did my job for me, expanding on some of these issues. But like I said, the commercial general liability policy will only cover the bodily injury and property damage. Any financial loss associated with an error or an omission would be explicitly excluded from the policy. You'll get a coverage disclaimer. So what we do is two ways. You can get a monoline professional liability policy, so just covering that exposure, and also you can try to combine it with your general liability and CPL. There are some specialty forms out there that we have access to that you'll be able to kind of combine all the insurance package on one good form, and as such, be able to save money. And so I don't know if you had any specific questions about professional liability. It's just a risk that is often overlooked and uncovered by the industry and many industries.
The thing that I always like to mention about insurance when I talk to people about it is, as a contractor, it's nice to be able to go into a job and tell the clients that we're probably one of the only, if not the only, geothermal contractor in our area that has everything from professional liability. So if we screw up the design in your house, it's not just you're calling me, you're calling, my insurance company, and you can buy the insurance policy a few different ways. One's based on when a claim occurs, or one's when the event occurs. So you can buy a policy that even if your company is no longer in the space in 5 years from now, the client's still protected. And then also, you can use it as a competitive advantage. So you have the pollution liability insurance that not all drillers carry, but you're subcontracting out the drillers, and it doesn't need to be hitting a very oil tank, as Frank mentioned. It could be, the hydraulic hoses break, and that gets into the drinking water aquifer because they have an open mud hole 200 feet deep. So there's a lot more liability risks associated with that work. And just a good professional liability insurance policy will cover those things.
Just to expand on that contract solution liability discussion too, mold is a big deal these days. I've seen, out of any given contaminant that I see come across my desk in terms of claimed activity, frequency, and severity, mold is a big issue. I don't know if that's reflective of an active plaintiffs bar recruiting plaintiffs, or an increase in frequency and severity of rain events, or a combination of these things. But nevertheless, the mold exposure is huge. Anytime you're punching a hole in a wall to put a geothermal system on, or doing any work with a system that moves air, that's a huge exposure. And there's other, of course, indoor contaminants that you have to worry about as well. Legionella, for example, and so on. So again, all of these risks would be uncovered by your commercial general liability policy. You need a separate contractor's pollution liability policy.
Thank you, Frank. We have a question from John.
John Schumacher, Aztec Geothermal.
Thank you.
I both love this panel and I'm terrified by it, but I'm glad everyone is here. So it's a two-part question. One is, I've always thought, and I know other contractors think about it, should we have an employee manual? Should we have a safety manual? Is it bad if we write it down and then they can use it as a stick to beat us with? I figure that's good for three of you, so you can mess with that. And then the other part, which I want Sam to tell me later, is I want to know definitively, is it a cool technology or hot technology? But just tell me later. Thank you.
I'll take the handbook thing. So there are really two schools of thought on the employee handbook amongst contractors of all stripes. However, I'm gonna tell you what I'm not in the handbook business, but I have a number of contractors that I do handbooks for. New York, we have the Paid Family Leave Act. You are required to have something in writing distributed to your employees regarding that act. Most people haven't necessarily done that yet. Having a basic handbook is a wonderful thing if you end up having a problem employee, because in order to terminate someone, they need to know what your policy is, and they need to know that what they are doing is not acceptable. If all you have are various packets, which is the other alternative in the construction industry, you may or may not have conveyed all of your standards to your employees with regard to attendance and tardyism and things like that. So I tend to go towards the employee handbook. However, you don't have to put everything in the world in your employee handbook. And there are folks that all that they do is they do employee handbooks, and they put everything in the world in there, and then you end up in this situation where every year you're having to update it. You all function in a world where your job sites have bulletin boards on them, and they have all of the required state and federal notices that you have to provide to all of your employees. Handbooks I do, I put in a section that says every employee is obligated to review the bulletin boards at the job site at which they are located, so you're not having to duplicate the latest statute in your handbook, because that's something that you don't want to be involved in. So to my mind, having a handbook is a good thing. It makes it easy. And John, what was the other piece to your question there?
So one thing is that's only commercial job sites. So when you go to a home, they don't.
When you go to a home, you've got nothing, and that's where your handbook is really helpful.
It's the safety manual, and again, same kind of thing. If you say these are the things, this is our safety procedures and things, and then you don't follow them, or you don't, again, it's like the employee handbook.
Yeah, but yeah, I can tell you that from my perspective, I prefer to have the safety manual, just because it becomes part of every toolbox talk. It becomes part of your regular and once you have employees that sign off on it. It tends to lend itself to a greater and more precise level of training within the company, in my view, than you would have otherwise. Most and safety encompasses a whole bunch of things. It's not simply job site safety. It's also corporate safety and lots of other things. But yes, in terms of doing work on a residential site, you still have a job site bulletin board at your office where your employees are originating from. So I tend to go in favor of having as minimal as possible, but having the stuff you need written down somewhere, because it does provide a level of safety for the company.
Just to expand on that a little bit, I second your favor of having these employee safety manuals. And from my perspective, it helps me market your account to the insurance carrier. So when I'm framing an individual risk to a carrier that is contemplating providing coverage to you, they'll say things to me like, oh, these geothermal guys, it's crazy, they're drilling, there's all this exposure, people are getting hurt. And my job is to take what I know about each individual client and help frame the client in the best possible light, which ultimately reduces the rate that you have to pay. So having things in place like a written safety manual is really good ammo for your broker and to go to the carrier and provide this information and help them reduce your rate. And perhaps some carriers that would be hesitant to write you but otherwise have good rates might be willing to do so if you can show evidence of these safety procedures being in place.
So if a contractor wanted to come up with a safety procedure book, employee handbook, do I call my construction attorney? Do I call my employment attorney? Do I call my insurance broker? Do I call my marketing company to make it look nice? Who do I call to, have this put together? Who tends to take the lead on it?
So Sterling Risk has a full loss control service. We have engineers on staff that used to work with carriers. We have a whole library of safety manuals available for our clients. So certainly, I'm volunteering services for you, Zach. That's okay.
And maybe we can build that as volunteering free services.
Yeah. But in any case, yeah. You can start with the broker, and it certainly always helps to bring in counsel.
Just quickly from an OSHA perspective on that, again, I am a manager also, so we have our internal safety and health management system for our own employees also, and we have to comply with other workplace, EEO, everything. So specifically on the safety and health side, though, I would encourage you to have as much documentation as possible. And to try to have a living, safety and health program that's again, a living document that, and to also have a progressive discipline procedure in place that if somebody doesn't follow that, you can document that for whatever reason there's been some compliance issues. And again, I will look at that documentation and we would consider that from a regulatory standpoint. I only require it where it is required by a specific standard, but documentation, in my opinion and per my experience, is a good thing.
We have time for one more.
Yeah, I'm just going to add something real quick, John, to your question on hot or cool. There is, well, no, I'm going to open it up big time now. The conference has a hashtag, NY-GEO18. So I challenge everyone here to go on there and vote whether GEO is cool or GEO is hot.
All right. So we have time for one more question. I saw there was one question in the back. Just back right.
Kevin O'Rourke, Groundwater. Hey, for Steve, you said document. That's what you said. That's what you're going to be reviewing when there's an action or a regulatory process you have to do. What's the best way other than a health and safety plan, toolbox talks, whatever your signature on them? What other way do you need to document that your employees are trained so that they can go out and come home every night?
So there's some standards that require inspection, training, documentation, and it's very specific to those standards. There's some certification requirements that need to be done yearly, those type of things. Again, have a competent person which walks your job sites and show me that you're looking for hazards and you're doing your best to identify and to control those hazards and eliminate your workers from them. Once you've identified them, take the next step to be proactive and to eliminate them. I mean, if you do and what you reasonably can do, and you show me documentation, sometimes you can train someone, retrain somebody. Sometimes things happen. So, I mean, I will look at that. I will consider that. I have certain negotiating parameters. If you have documentation like that, there's certain things I can do in some cases.
So if we can give a round of applause to our panelists. All right, so at this point, our happy hour is about to begin downstairs. Happy hour will still end at 7 o'clock when dinner will be back in this room. We ask everyone to please vacate this room at this point. Our questions for the panelists, if you take them just outside. They do need to turn this room around. Dinner will be up here. If you've been at the conference in previous years, it's been downstairs. Everyone in their pouches should have 2 drink tickets and a dinner ticket, and those are downstairs. The bar is downstairs.
Sponsored by ZBF Geothermal. Thanks, Zach.
We hope you enjoyed this presentation from the NY-GEO 2018 conference. We would like to thank our sponsors, exhibitors, speakers, and attendees for making this such a great event. For more information on this conference, including speaker bios, presentation slides, great photographs, and more session recordings, go to our website at NY-GEO.org. That's NY-GEO.org. Thanks.